for all our viewers watching Black American Muslim Opinions. I haven't been on live for a while, and this is maybe one of my first live interviews. Been sick with COVID for a little while, but I'm recovering. So today, I want to interview our brother, who's an attorney, brother Hakeem Muhammad. He's also the founder of Black Dawah Network. So the brother Hakeem Esquire, right? Be the right title. Tell me a little bit about yourself and your career.
Sure. So I'm an attorney. I describe myself as an attorney that works on behalf of Black America, particularly focused on protecting the human rights of Black Americans living in the hood, in the inner cities. And it's a real honor to appear on this program. And I thank you, brother, for inviting me. So I've done legal work on behalf of prisoners' rights, especially with African-American Muslims who are struggling with the correctional facilities across America who repeatedly abuse their rights. I've also done work in police brutality litigation, as well as criminal defense. I work in the racial justice litigation unit, where I work to pioneer as well as formulate different legal arguments to challenge the impact of structural racism on African Americans in criminal trials. So that's what I do as an attorney.
How long you been in the field now?
Well, I've been a practicing attorney for a little over 2 years now. Before that, I did various internships at different organizations in different areas of law.
Where do you go to law school?
Northeastern Law School here in Boston.
MashaAllah, that's good. That's good news. It's good to see our peoples into the legal system to help others. What did you study in law?
So one particular area of interest is how structural racism maintained itself even after the removal of Jim Crow laws, even after the removal of explicit laws that discriminated against Black people, how structural racism against Black people continued. I'm interested in just the entirety of the African American legal tradition, African American legal thought, how African American attorneys have sought to use the legal system to challenge racism, critiques of that method, etc.
Tell me, so what's some of the challenges for African Americans in the legal system?
Well, in terms of one of the major challenges is in terms of, the ability of civil rights legislation or even civil rights laws to really do anything meaningful as far as redressing racism or discrimination against Black people. It's really, really limited. There's been many instances where in different, African American legal scholars have discussed this, where different even laws that were passed supposedly to benefit Black people or to fight against structural racism, purportedly for those purposes, end up instead being used to further white supremacy, to further white nationalism. So for example, one example of this is they've actually now used various states have now used like the equal protection law of the United States to say that critical race theory should not be taught in school. So they've used the United States Constitution to essentially critique African American critiques of structural racism. So I mean, that's just one of many examples.
Yeah, you have tell us a little bit about critical race theory, because you have a lot of Muslims who are actually against critical race theory being taught. You have some YouTubers, Saj Liphan, Daniel Hachikachu. I have noticed that they've been pushing hard against critical race theory. I don't know why they're talking about that topic, because they're not Black themselves, but they're promoting it. It also appears in some of the YouTubers from on the Muslim side. You have some Muslim YouTubers who support the far right agenda. So can you tell us a little bit about CRT and
Yeah, sure. So I'm familiar with some of these critiques of critical race theory. I don't subscribe to the belief that you necessarily have to be black, or you're not being black sort of delegitimizes a critique of critical race theory. But certainly, the majority of the people who are engaging in these critiques of critical race theory have not the slightest clue as to what they are talking about. So, critical race theory, it developed. It's when you talk about critical race theory, you're talking about a large chunk of African American legal scholarship about structural racism against Black America post Jim Crow. So that name is essentially what is like a post facto term to describe a large body of scholarship by African American legal scholars who are critiquing structural racism post Jim Crow. So, for example, the attorney Derek Bell, he helped litigate the Brown versus Board of Education decision that got civil rights, that purportedly held that separation, that being separate but not equal, that schools, that overturned school segregation, that mandated that Black and white people attend integrated schools. He helped to litigate those cases. And later in the 80s, Derek Bell he's coming to the conclusion that African Americans are still living they're still attending segregated schools. Their schools are still of an inferior quality than that of white schools. And so he does an analysis as to how school segregation continued. And over time, just that body of scholarship that looked at how structural racism manifested itself post Jim Crow, it eventually acquired the name critical race theory. So when you're talking about critical race theory, you're talking about a large body of African American scholarship to address structural racism against African Americans post Jim Crow. I haven't seen any compelling evidence that that critical race theory is in any way oppositional or antagonistic to Islam. It does not. So critical race theory does not address issues related to the purpose of life, why we were created. It's not it's not putting forth theological claim. This legal scholarship addressing structural racism against Black America post Jim Crow.
All right, because some people are trying to connect the LBGQTI agenda to the critical race theory, and they're saying that is what is problematic about CRT.
So, I mean, there would have to be some. Critical race theory is dealing with exactly that, structural racism against African Americans post Jim Crow. It's dealing with the failure of Brown versus Board of Education to do away or to eradicate structural racism. It's dealing with the failure of equal protection laws to really give African Americans meaningful equality in America. And it's a fact, you hear all these people who are critiquing liberalism. Critical race theory is a critique of liberal efforts to redress structural racism in America. It's arguing that liberalism, that liberal ideals about equality are in America, in their legislative system, are insufficient to address structural racism. Are there scholars in critical race theory who in the alternative or may promote LGBT in their scholarship? Certainly. But the core of what critical race theory is about does not address that issue really at all.
All right, because there's a lot of there's a lot of people, especially our peoples. Our peoples, unfortunately, Black Americans, Muslims. I'm
sorry, brother. So there are Muslim academics who engage in critical race theory scholarship, as well as analysis. Just like you may have some left wing people with more socialist ideas who also engage in it as well. But the core tenets of critical race theory, how structural racism maintained itself post Jim Crow, the failure of civil rights legislation to redress structural racism, those are the core tenets of critical race theory, and I don't see any compelling evidence as to how they would contradict Islam at all.
Mm. Now, a little bit about your other platform you have, which is the Dawa Network. Can you talk a little bit about Dawa Network? I have been viewing it for a few months, I believe. Tell me us more about it.
Yeah, so Black Dawah Network is an organization that promotes Islamic values within inner city Black America. We particularly focus on, what we call the hood, the streets, and sort of promoting Islamic values in those different areas. So, we hold different Islamic outreach events in, different hoods across America. We've been in Chicago. We've held events here in Boston, in Houston, in Memphis, and other different in Oakland as well. We've talked, in the hood, just had Muslims engaging in the community about Islam, talking to brothers about the Quran, handing out copies of the autobiography of Malcolm X. We also have, different, publications. One major area that, we really wanted to address is, the proliferation of Afrocentric so-called critiques of Islam, saying that Islam is, for Arabs, it's not for Black people, that is somehow incompatible with us, as African Americans. So we have a lot of scholarship just critiquing, deconstructing, Afrocentric critiques of Islam, demonstrating how Islam actually spread through West Africa, challenging, this idea that Islam stands for Arab subjugation of Black people. So that's, it can be found on the website as well. But also, true to our objective of promoting Islamic outreach within Black America, we currently have, an effort in place to challenge the rise and the proliferation of gang culture. This is a major issue, dealing with, the Bloods, the Crips in Cali, Gangster Disciples, Black Disciples in Chicago. So we work with brothers who are in prison, who are former gang members and who have put down the flag of their gang to uplift the flag of Islam. And, they're working on different books and different initiatives where they not only speak out against their former gang, but they critique, the activities of their gang, from an Islamic perspective. And they also are warning, Black youth who may be enamored or attracted by the life that they once lived, what that lifestyle will actually lead to and the consequences of it in this life and the next.
That's a really great cause. What are there any current projects you are on right now? This.
Yeah, so we actually recently released a good book from a brother. His name is Brother Abdul Monteen. He wrote a book called The Deception of Street Life. Brother Abdul Monteen was a former member of the Four Corner Hustlers gang based in the west side of Chicago. And he is currently incarcerated with a 65-year sentence for having committed, he was convicted of first-degree murder. And in his book, he's talking about his journey to Islam. He's talking about just his activities as a gang member, and how he came to see that gang life, street life, was based upon deception, and the consequences of those deceptions. Is a very, very powerful, as well as self-reflective book, where he's talking about his old lifestyle. Because, we have a hip hop industry, we have rap industries that is glamorizing this whole idea of being a thug, of being a gang member. And so, we have brothers who have put down the flag of their gang and really teaching, and put down the flag of their gang to put up the flag of Islam, and are really teaching what that lifestyle is really about and the implications of it. And so the book, The Deception of Street Life, can be found on Amazon.com. This is a book that we're going to be pushing in major prisons and jails throughout the United States, from Rikers Island to Attica to Stateville Prison. We also have another forthcoming book by a brother who was a former member of the Crips, who, he took his Shahada in Rikers Island, and he's talking about why he put down the flag of his gang to uplift the flag of Islam. And again, he's warning Black youth about the consequences of that lifestyle in this life and the next. So we work with as many brothers as possible, former gang leaders, former brothers who are active shooters in their gangs, who have put down that lifestyle and uplifted the flag of Islam.
How can somebody purchase the book?
So the book, The Deception Street Life, is available on Amazon.
I have the link. I'm gonna put the link later on in the description of the video, so whoever follow this video can get your websites and your book. What financial help do you need for these projects?
So certainly, we have a lot of initiatives, organizational efforts that we're working on that certainly could use financial backing. I've been working on a book for about over 3 years now. It's called The Muslim Guide for Understanding Structural Racism and Its Impact on Black America. And that book is a very comprehensive book that details how in every area of life, from the criminal legal system to the healthcare system, there's a chapter on the educational system. There's a chapter on the economic system. In every area of life, how structural racism impacts those different areas of life for Black people. So, for example, in the area of economics, the studies are very conclusive that most wealth in America is transferred through inheritance. Black people white people gain significantly more wealth through inheritance than Black people. And that is the major cause of the Black-white wealth gap. And more importantly, it cannot be resolved within the current confines of the American system with the Black-white wealth gap. There are studies that even going onward to 2050, 2000, for it, that Black-white wealth gap is nowhere near closing. It's not projected to close based upon studies that they've done on just the transfers of inherited wealth. So the book discusses that. The book discusses the different ways that Black people are treated harsher in the criminal legal system. There's studies that showing the darker your pigmentation is, controlling for other factors such as your criminal history, such as your education background, or other factors that they look at. Just being a dark, they even give lighter skinned Black people a more lenient synthesis than darker skinned Black people. So the studies detailing structural racism in the criminal legal system is very, very conclusive. So the book discusses that as well, and it's really about reviving the legacy of Malcolm X. Malcolm X was, for Black people, Malcolm X was our leader. And Malcolm X, especially as Muslims, we need to come back to that legacy. We need to stop the cooning, the Uncle Tomming, the buck dancing. We need to come back to the legacy of Malcolm X and what Malcolm X stood for, because Malcolm X is responsible for so many shahadas throughout the United States. So why do we not want to continue that type of dawah? Not the dawah. I see these corny guys on YouTube, so-called, and I see you getting on them too. They try to give dawah, but they're anti-Black, they're racist. What type of dawah? What type of dawah is that? When you're insulting the very foundation of Islam, how Islam spread in the United States, which was hands in hands with the liberation movement for Black people. So we're coming back to that legacy of Malcolm. We're reviving it.
I met Muslim, white, Canadian who took shahada from Malcolm X work.
Yeah, of course.
Reading and listening. White Canadians I met.
Mm-hmm.
So his dawah has really impacted a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely do get on them brothers. A lot of those brothers, especially the African American brothers, who, they don't understand. There's a segment of the Muslim community where the African American Muslims went to Saudi to study in different universities in Saudi. And some of these brothers don't want to talk about Black social issues. I let them know, Malcolm X opened the door for you guys to study in Saudi. how you guys are ignoring or turning your back on Black social issues. But that comes from a lot of the self-hate and self-hate. A lot
Certainly.
of us don't know that we have that.
Certainly.
You know?
Yeah.
A lot of us, even myself, I
What's
grew
the
up
hate
like,
color of your skin? Who taught you to hate the
who
way?
told you to hate that?
Yeah.
We talk about Black social problems, you're a Black nationalist. Who told you that?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there are Muslims in our community who look like us who are saying these things, and I definitely talk about it. I'll call them out, you know. Some of them don't like me, some get mad, some of them ignore me, names. I get all type of somebody call me homosexual, one of them. I'm like, wow. But let me know that the truth is hitting them.
Yeah.
They don't like it and they have no response for it. They have no response for it.
Keep striving in the way of Allah without the fear of the criticism of any critic.
Oh, you be getting criticism, people be mad, and it be Black people who are mad. That's the worst thing. Is other African American Muslims who like me and you, they're definitely upset. But let's talk a little bit more now about you, right? Now I know that you converted to Islam. Give us a little bit of background about your experience on how you became Muslim. I know you grew up in the nation. Your father was part of the Nation of Islam. I read some of your stories when in Chicago. You met somebody, I think a brother who was from Bosnia. Tell us the story, man. Muslims be
so my relationship with Islam, throughout my life is really, complex. So in my early childhood, I certainly had different exposures to Islam. My father was part of the Nation of Islam. I had different uncles who were Sunni Muslims coming out of prison. And I used to hear them. They used to debate with my father a lot. But my mother is my mother's Christian. My mother, believe she was in the nation for a bit, but after my parents divorced, my mother returned to Christianity. And so, but I was certainly raised, from my father, with very strong Nation of Islam influences, but also spent a lot of time, with my uncles, were Sunni. And so, I was, as a kid, you navigate among different things. You just do what you see other people around you doing. But when my parents divorced, I moved in with my mother, and my mother began, attempting to raise me as a Christian. And so, I was going to church. Then. Unfortunately, we moved to a really like rough area of Chicago in the South Side. It's famous in the whole drill rap scene. If you all are familiar with G Herbo, G Herbo talks about developing post-traumatic stress syndrome, from the shootouts that used to take place on Essex Street. So the dominant culture of that street, of just the neighborhood, the dominant culture of the school that I began attending was gang culture. So the particular schools that I went to was heavy in terms of Gangster Disciples, which is a major gang in Chicago, the Gangster Disciples, and just even the street that we lived on, Essex Street, who had nonstop reoccurring homicides. The drug economy was rampant. And over time, I began to really lose any really connection to any sort of religion at all. I was not actively. I would say early on, especially in school, I held on to some of the Nation of Islam beliefs, but over time, it really just began to wane. I wasn't really following much of anything, but a lot of the the shootouts, the murders that were constantly taking place, on Essex Street, I began to really listening to Tupac heavily, right? So Tupac has a lot of songs just about life growing up in the hood. Life goes on. How many brothers fell victim to the streets? Rest in peace. There's a heaven for. So I used to listen to a lot of Pac, and it would just help me get through, what was just taking place in the neighborhood. But I was always trying to find something that would be the solution to what was taking place in terms of these gang conflicts that were taking place in the neighborhood. Because I was raised to be extremely pro-black, I couldn't really get involved in any of that. And even in school, me and my brother, Like we were like the only like Nation of Islam kids in a majority gangster disciple school. And so because of that, I was really isolated from the majority of my peers who, that was like the dominant culture of the neighborhood. So as years went on, I was actually I created my own religion that was based upon Tupac. So Tupac has this video where he's talking about he's like, we don't grow up. He says we don't split the Red Sea, but we walk through the hood, without getting shot, right? So Tupac, he talk. There's a video on YouTube that Tupac talks about his beliefs in God, and he drops that line. I was like, as a teenager, I was like, he's saying some real stuff in there. So I was like, man, this is what I'm gonna follow. So that was my beliefs for a while. But at around like 2012, 2011, like the murders, the gangs on like Essex Street really began to like escalate. And it was just like they call it Terror Town. And at the same time, I ended up getting a scholarship to this. I was a part of what's called the Chicago Debate League, and I got a scholarship to this university program where basically it was like the best debaters, highest ranked debaters get invited to this program. And there I met this Bosnian brother, and so I met this Bosnian brother, and the brother just assumed that I was Muslim because I have an Islamic name. So he started inviting me to a Juma prayer to pray with him, and I was like, nah, man, I don't I don't follow like so he was I was like, man, I don't follow that Arab stuff. That's what I told him. And he was like, Arab stuff. And then he was like, aren't you Muslim? Hakeem Muhammad. I was like, nah, I follow my own religion. It's based upon, Tupac. And, Tupac talked about how, black people, we go through the hood and, we don't get shot. And, that's like splitting the Red Sea. So that's what I told him that I, believed in. He looked at me like I was crazy. And he started going, back and forth, and he was like encouraging me to, pray with him and to learn about Islam. And at first, I wasn't really taking it seriously at all. But then over time, some of my Nation of Islam beliefs started to kick in, where I started telling him, because I used to hear a lot of this from my father, and just the atmosphere that I was in. I was like, what you're following is the Arab religion. It's bad for black people. The Arabs and their version of Islam teach black people to hate themselves. Because this is what I was taught a lot from my father. And the brother really challenged me on this. So the brother encouraged me to read about Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and he also encouraged me to read the Quran. And so, I began reading. He gave me some books. And I've never so he was extremely devoted to his religion. He was very convicted, had a lot of conviction in his religion, and really rubbed off on me because you can tell strongly, he was extremely offended by what I was saying. And I was like, this is, you all are teaching black people to hate themselves. You're following, the Arab religion, because we used to have Arabs in different corner stores in our neighborhood who would mistreat black people, treat black people horribly. And so this is
same today.
Yeah,
exists every in America, unfortunately.
Yeah. So when I'm hearing my father say black people shouldn't be following this, and I see Arab corner stores in the hood, it sort of like re-solidified that, okay, why would any black person be following this? And then he told me, Islam is based upon Tawheed. And I was like, Tawheed and some Arab stuff. And then, so, me and this brother are debating back and forth. And so I'm like, okay, finally, I'm going to go toe to toe with him. And I'm going to do my research. So, I went in on Google and I put in Tawheed. And there was this book on, it's called The Fundamentals of Tawheed by Brother Bilal Phillips. So I started reading, Dr. Bilal. Yeah, Dr. Bilal Phillips. Yeah. So I started reading this book, Fundamentals of Tawheed, and he actually talks about how the different Arab polytheists, right? Arabs who were polytheists. He even talks about this struggle between monotheism, belief in one God, and the belief of many different gods. And actually, when I read that, it reminded me of a book that I read previously Uh, so there was this book that I read. It's called like The Great Rulers of the African Past. If you remember that Nas song, Nas talks about Timbuktu, Timbuktu, every race came to get books. So when I was a shorty, I used to, that was my favorite rap, and I used to, research everything that Nas said. So I wanted to read up on Timbuktu. So
Mhm.
in Timbuktu, in the it was the Songhai Empire or the Mali Empire with the Askia Muhammad. There was this conflict in that book discussed where you had the African rulers, Askia Muhammad, who wanted the people to worship one God and to have like this pure Islam based upon belief and worship of one God, and other people used to like mix and mingle, Islam with polytheism, and there was this struggle. And so, it dawned on me that, when you look at like the Mali Empire, the Songhai Empire, they were Sunni Muslims. They followed the Maliki school of Islamic jurisprudence. But even further, when you read the Sirah, when you read the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, this belief that Islam is for Arabs certainly cannot, or Arabs alone certainly cannot be sustained. You find Arab polytheists who opposed Islam. You find, people of African heritage, from Bilal, may Allah be pleased with him, who, went up against, Arab polytheists and proclaiming that Allah is one. So, as I read deeper, I was like, this belief that Islam, that, or the version of Islam that he's following or promoting, is for Arab certainly cannot be sustained. But even further than that, when I began to really read about Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his Sunnah, his example, how he lived, the principles of Islam generally, I became convinced that this is what we needed to be promoting in our community. This is the solution to the issues of gang violence. This is the solution to issues of drugs, and all of these social ills. And so, I became more convicted, in Islam, that this is what we should be following. I took my Shahada. And as soon as I go back, to Chicago, I get to hearing about this guy named Chief Keef.
Mhm. Who's this guy?
Chief Keef.
Yeah.
so
I,
so so
mhm.
it's funny. So he dropped this album. He's a drill rapper. So my apartment in Chicago is about it's around three or so miles away from Chief Keef, and so Chief Keef is from this area of Chicago called O Block, and and he would basically make rap songs dissing dead members of rival gangs, um, you know, essentially mocking the deaths of rival gang members, basically making militant music, promoting street life, and it was so ironic because I came back, with the spirit of, we need to be promoting Islam. And then the next thing I know, I see Chief Keef just have an influence on just the entire South Side of Chicago, where now my street Essex became like the next major street in Chicago, with different brothers trying to be drill rappers. So, so you had G Herbo. So in the apartment on my block, there's a brother by the name of Cedron, Shooter Shells. So I really saw the proliferation of just more, Jahiliyyah essentially, and so really went into a lot of my influences in establishing Black Dawah Network, and really just seeing the need to really promote Islamic values within inner city Black America. And also, I want to point this out. So one of Chief Keef's homies, he's in prison now, but he took his shahada, um, and
Mashallah.
he's really active in terms of dawah, promoting Islam. So inshallah, it can continue.
Inshallah, inshallah. Well, what about now? What about some of the what? How did you take your experience of because growing up, even though the Nation of Islam, we know they're not Muslim, but growing up, being part of the nation, you definitely have Black consciousness with you, right?
Yeah.
How some of those values help you related to dealing with Black issues, because we can understand from the nation and your experience being now Sunni Muslim coming to the religion. how how do you use those experience now dealing with the social issues that Black people are going through? Because there's a lot of African American Muslims who have a problem with their identity of being Black. I give you example. We have some of our brothers and sisters who do not associate with being Black, and they might, you know, become Muslim and start talking with an accent like they from Arab side or Asia. You know, I hear people say this all the time, right? And I have seen it before. But I'm from New York, so the African American Muslims have their own little culture in New York. But I have seen this. So some of us we're fighting with our identity, and we try to have other people identity, right? The Arab identity or the Asian identity. And this is where I find sometimes some of the Muslims in the African American community don't talk about Black issues or fix them. They have some of the attitudes of the racist Muslims. They pick them up. So how do you deal with that or use your experience growing up? Because your experience with your father, with the nation, and you coming Sunni Muslim, all those experience make who you are today. All right, you might not see it, you might not notice it, but it's part of who you are today. Like when I was a child, my mother took me, I was a kid, to see Malcolm X in the movies. My mother's a Christian, right? Me seeing that movie, Malcolm X, by Spike Lee, that movie directly and indirectly influenced my thinking as a child. I remember when I came out the movie theater, I told my mom outside the movie theater, "Yo, how we be Muslim?" And she said, "Oh, we're Christians, we believe this, and Muslims believe that." But man, I didn't care about what she had to say. I liked the image. I liked when I seen the movie Malcolm X in front of the precinct with all the Negroes lined up, the police scared. As a kid, I didn't see that in the streets. I didn't see that in all white schools learning Eurocentric ideas. When I seen that in the movie by Spike Lee, that movie influenced me directly and indirectly as a child. I was probably in my pre-teens when that movie came out. And that movie influenced me, even though I wasn't Muslim, it influenced me to want to have an interest about Islam. Despite the Arabs in my neighborhood who was selling pork and lotto tickets and all the things to get high with, despite some of the Indian Muslims being racist towards Blacks and Asian Muslims, man, despite all of that, I still came to Islam. But that movie influenced me, even today, me as a person, and influenced this channel. That's why I have Malcolm X in the picture in the background, right? It influenced even this channel, influenced, you know, I learned Islam myself traveling to the Muslim land. I lived in Egypt for a couple of years. I speak Arabic language. I've been married to an Arab for about 11 years. I have children and everything. And those experiences make me who I am today. So now, despite all the self-hate, which I did have, right? At a particular time, as a Muslim, as a Sunni Muslim, learning Islam, working in multiple culture masjids, right? Seeing people take positions against the Black peoples, or I see masjids that are non-Black in Black neighborhoods, and they care nothing about the people in the neighborhood, and I participated in that, right? Self-hate, but our experience make who we are. One day something clicked in my head, woke me up, man, nah, man, I'm gonna take Islam to empower my peoples. Our peoples need it. So some of those experiences with your father, with the nation, with your mother, with that brother from Bosnia becoming Sunni Muslim, and who you are today, or what you're trying to do and what you're actually doing, all the experience in the past make who you are today. It's very good, your story, how you became Muslim, how you work with the nation. You shouldn't be ashamed about that, right? Because I have met some Muslims who came out of the Nation of Islam, despite their beliefs. I have met Muslims who came out of the War of Deen community. Despite some of the things that go on in the War of Deen community, they have some Black consciousness with them. When I look at some of them today who have experience of being Muslim and they came out of the nation and they became Sunni Muslims, I find some of them, when it comes to Black consciousness, Black people working together, ethno-arrogation, working together as a Black community, they have no problems doing that. I don't have to explain to them guys like 2 or 3 times, hey, we need to do something. I can tell them one time, us as black people need to do, Muslims need to do something. But those who didn't come up from the nation, who became Muslim, who didn't come off the War of Deen community and came to really traditional Sunni Islam, who didn't come from the War of Deen community, who didn't come out the nation, like myself, a lot of us, we become Muslim and we have some of these attitudes, negative attitudes and misbehavior towards black people. So those experiences that you grew up with the nation, despite the nation being upon falsehood, those experiences did warp you into who you are today with the nation and with the Sunni brother you met from the Baj. They make who you are, right? So alhamdulillah, brother, what I have seen is very good. I read your bio, I read your website. I know what type of person I'm speaking to. Alhamdulillah, you're a very good brother and you're young. A lot of our young people your age have not reached the level where you're at today. When I'm talking about knowing about self. A lot of our brothers still don't know about self. I have brothers who got black, like me and you, got college degree, and have anti-black sentiment with them, who are Muslim. And I'm 44 years old. I have brothers around my age, a little younger, and your age, and they take positions against black people. And they would say, oh, they just kuffar. They would go and see the Arabs, Yemeni, I live in New York, Yemeni in the corner store selling all this stuff to black people. And they would say, oh, these black people, they kuffar. So what? They kuffar.
Yeah,
right?
It's not Islam.
We see this, brother. We see this. We know that. There's a lot of black people who hold, Muslims who hold these attitudes, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm telling you, your experience, the nation, you coming to Sunni Muslim, all that makes you who you are today. That's a lot of people have not reached your level. I'm letting you know that right now.
You know, so even my mother, you know, my mother attended a very pro-black church. It's actually it became a famous church, Jeremiah Wright, the Trinity Church. It became famous because, you know, Jeremiah Wright took a very antagonistic stance against, you know, America, the American government, and what they're doing to black people, Reverend Jeremiah Wright. But that whole tradition, that whole African American tradition of speaking truth to power, of standing up against oppression, that's a part of our tradition as Muslims. When you speak about, I mean, let's be blunt, the Nation of Islam has produced the most significant African American Sunni Muslims of the 20th century. We're talking about Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, who are responsible for so many, first in giving Muslims courage to be Muslims, to be convicted in their stance about Islam and the truth of Islam. So certainly, you know, everyone has their different journeys to Islam. You know, there's a story about one of the Sahabas, may Allah be pleased with them. I believe his name is, correct me if I'm wrong, he was a Persian, and he grew up in Zoroastrianisms. And
Salman Farsi.
Salman Farsi, yeah. So he grew up, you know, he grew up worshiping fire. And then, you know, he came across the Christians, and he said, you know, what these Christians are upon, it's better than worshiping fire. And so he spent his time, you know, among the Christians, and then he came across Islam, and he accepted Islam, and he became one of, you know, the great soldiers and the great da'is of Islam.
MashaAllah. You know, Salman Farsi, radiyallahu anhu, his story as how he became Muslim is it's a very good bio to study, especially for somebody who's thinking about Islam or becoming Muslim, because he was the fire worshiper, then he became a Christian, right? And he got put into slavery, and then how he met the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the prophethood and his search for knowledge. It's one of the beautiful stories from the companions of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he died an old man also, Salman Farsi. So, you know, our stories, our experience in the past make who we are today. Those experiences in the past make who we are today. Look, Khalid ibn Walid, he was one time the enemy of Islam, yes? Very famous fighter, right? He became Muslim. His experience before made him a better Muslim. Why? Because he's a Muslim and he's a good fighter.
Yeah, speaking about Khalid ibn Walid, may Allah be pleased with him. You know, we tell brothers who are in the streets gang banging, you know, all the time, you know, fighting on behalf of Jahiliyyah, fighting to destroy, you know, their own people. You know, that's inspiration for you. You know, you can put down what you're fighting for. You're fighting for Jahiliyyah. You're fighting for ignorance and lift up. You know, fight for Islam. You know, work to spread Islam. And so I know a lot of brothers, you know, who are gang banging. You know, they really work to establish, you know, Islam, especially in the prisons, and they really are inspired by Khalid ibn Walid. May Allah be pleased with them.
You know, I became Muslim in prison myself. I was 20 years old when I was 20. And I think it's awkward to say, but some of my best experience with brotherhood I've been in the prisons.
Yeah,
I don't think I would be the character or the type of Muslim I am today if it wasn't for the type of brothers I met in prison.
Yeah, I've never been locked up, but those, like the Muslims that I encounter in like Stateville prison, that I love those Muslims. I see like sincere brotherhood. Those are some really, like the Muslims in Stateville, like the Muslims in Menard prison. Like those are some really, really sincere brothers. And I really think, you know, when we talk about dawah, like this, like one of the largest, so many people are taking the shahadas in prison, and it's really time that we really begin to work and make that dawah that is occurring in these prisons, that's having so many people take their shahada, it needs to reverberate back to the hood. And so that's one thing that Black Dawah Network is working towards, that really a lot of these brothers who are, you know, locked up, who have put down the flags of the gang, you know, uplifted the flag of Islam, we have to work with them and put their stories out there, have them speaking and work to have them speak to brothers in the streets. And I'm telling you, like you'll really see Islam grow in our community.
You know, because I think some of the things that need to be for brothers or sisters, that the Muslims that are in prison, I think that we need to have a plan for them. Because when I came out of prison as a Muslim, especially those individuals in prison who didn't grow up with a father, I was including myself, many times don't learn accountability. They might learn a little bit about Islam. They might learn a little bit about a trade or a skill, depending what prison or what state they're in. But we need to learn a little bit about accountability, working together. Because when I came out of prison, there was no one really there to show me the ropes, how to put my life back together. You got me? Even though there is preaching in the masjid, even though there's classes in the masjid, even though some brothers give you some ideas, some brothers who got experience. But a lot of those brothers who coming out of prison I have met, some of them end up going back to prison. Some of them. Our brothers came out to Shahada in prison, came out prison 2 or 3 times, finally got tired of prison, start practice the deen and get a trade or a skill. But some of those brothers who come out of prison, sister, they need a means to make money. You got a felony, you're not gonna get a job. You know how many years I couldn't work a legitimate job? I've been a felon in New York. I'm 44. I went to prison when I was 19. I'm 44. That stuff still follows. You know? So there needs to be also programs to teach brothers how to have a business, so they don't have to depend on the job. This is some of the things that I talk about on my channel with another sister who has a business. She has a nonprofit organization helping inmates also, right? She helps them how to get a job. Start their own business when they come out of it. That's what a nonprofit work. Right? Teach them skills so they can go work for themselves. Right? And then we need, I think, a bigger look to the future, how to take these type of brothers and sisters where they're going to be the new pioneers in the Muslim community, start community. We need to have those type of conversations. How they're going to be now pioneer. Because when I was in prison, I don't think my love for Islam wouldn't be as it is today if it wasn't because of the Muslims I met in prison. I met some old school brothers. Some of them were political prisoners. Some of them came from the Black Panther.